How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Today on Culture Architects, we're joined by the founder and CEO of CultureCheck, Nathan Hall, for a long overdue conversation on inclusive leadership and inclusive cultures. You know, Nathan's a prolific storyteller. He's made it to Ottawa Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list back in 2020 due to his success with the video marketing agency that he founded called Simple Story. And he was the CEO there for 4 years. That same year, he built CultureCheck, and really an anti-racism support center based in Ottawa. And in 2022, he moved away from Simple Story to become CultureCheck's CEO full-time. Today, CultureCheck is an award-winning social enterprise serving not only racialized professionals, but also corporate allies and leaders who really want to build cultures that actively strive for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Nathan writes in his website that culture is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And we're in for a wealth of stories from him today. So some of them are about success and some of them about inequality, but all of them are very real, timely, and enriching of our understanding of culture. So let's get into it now. Nathan, welcome to the Culture Architects podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
I love having you. And this is going to be a really interesting conversation. And honestly, it's different than many of the conversations we've had so far. And I think it's an important topic and it's a sensitive topic. And I'm eager to dig deeper into it with you. But first, just for our audience sake, let's get a little bit of background. So as I understand it, you got your college degree in sociology from the University of Ottawa. So we've got a Canadian with us here.
Yep.
You know, back then, like, did you always know that you wanted to get into leadership, or like, how did that get, evolve?
Yeah, good question. No, I didn't know. I feared leadership. It was not something I wanted to be a part of. I liked playing in the background. I didn't like attention growing up. From like kindergarten, high school, like I didn't like school. I played the background, quiet to myself. And that was kind of how I made my way through, maybe some traumas mixed in there where it's like too much attention was not a good thing. So I internalized that attention was not good. So I played the background. That was how I kind of navigated through. And going into university, it had just come, like, I didn't know really much about sociology, but as I was looking up the different programs, it just, something in it spoke to me. And I'm just like, this is of interest to me. I was always very much studying. Now looking back, I was studying culture. I was studying people, how people interacted, how they moved. I was always thinking a lot, but I didn't have any language for it. So it really intrigued me. And a lot of people were like, what are you going to do with that, right? Like, it was always the second question. People would be like, in school, it's like, what's your major? What are you going to do with that? And it's like, I
was a philosophy major in college, so I understand that. I understand that.
Shout out to all the history majors as well. I know they get it. But yeah, so it was really through that process and that I really learned, I discovered a lot. I learned a lot about myself, put a lot of language and terminology to these things, but still didn't know what that was going to shape up later. And then later on, I had gone back for business school, and it was really with CultureCheck. And as I became a leader, all of these things started converging. Right? Like, I can see the difference between most of the business schools classmates came from engineering, came from business, and they had a certain way of thinking. They had a certain way of approaching things. And I really stood out. And at the time, it felt like a weakness. But over time, I began to see, how I can use that to my advantage and how that's actually a benefit, that I have this unique set of skills and experiences to really bring it together. And so it was really through all of this process that I realized all of these things are connected. But before, I was just kind of chasing what felt right and where I was feeling called to. And now my life has all converged over the years.
So tell me, did you start Simple Story? Were you the founder of that?
No. Yeah. So I wanted to clarify that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so tell me about that.
So it was a company that had been around for a few years, and then it had come across some hard times, and it began floundering. And so that's when I was brought in. And one of the main things that I focused on was culture. Going in there, it had become such a toxic culture, in lieu of better terms, and a lot of the staff had left, and dissatisfaction, clients were unhappy, the product had taken a hit, and so everything was kind of struggling financially. It was struggling, and so it was really coming in there, parachuting in.
And you're thinking this is a good idea to join?
Trying to stabilize. I think I'm a bit of a masochist.
It sounds like it.
But no, like it was very interesting. I didn't know the extent of the damage until I got in there. So that was kind of a thing. But, going through that process really stretched me. It opened me up. It gave me an understanding to really battle test a lot of the theories that I've had in my mind and how I think things should work. Because obviously as an employee, you're always very critical of leadership, right? And
Yes.
like how I would do it if I was in that position. Why won't we do this? And so now it really gave me an opportunity to test all of the things that I had thought about and what I thought worked, taking theory, taking my own how I analyzed and viewed things, and how I would apply that in the real world. And so it was a crash course. It was incredible, like a different type of experience than the startup of where you're kind of building things, you're finding product market fit, but now it's like the plane is, you're already in the plane and it's diving down, and now you have to kind of fix all of these things. And so it was a life-changing experience that really shaped everything. As I went into Culture Check, it was so much of it was rooted in those experiences.
So I always find it interesting, your comment that, when you're an employee, you see things in a certain way. They ought to do things like this, or they ought to do that. And I always find it that anyone who has, let me say it this way, anyone who's not been in a leadership role frequently is critical of what leaders do, without much an appreciation for the decisions that are being made are usually more complex than they look like on their surface. And you're typically trying to balance a variety of competing influences. When you've been in leadership roles, my experience is you tend to see other decisions that people make and say, there's probably more than meets the eye here. I only see a piece of this, but there's probably more because I've been in that position before. But I also find that when you mentioned that when you went now into a leadership role and you're testing some of the theories that you thought might work, I'm curious, give me an example. Let's go two angles on this. One, what's an example of something you thought in theory made sense, but in practical application wasn't quite that way? And then we'll shift to, okay, there are other things that you thought and actually work out that way. So let's start with, what did you think that you were wrong about once you got into it?
I think I was wrong about.
So you thought this, in theory, this sounded like a great idea. Now that I'm doing it, well, it's a little more different than that.
I think trying to, that fine line between likability and effective leadership, right? Like there's a part where it's, don't be a jerk. Right. But there is kind of a lot of theories out there. It's like, no, good managers should be jerks. And, I've heard those arguments. And then sometimes finding that balance between, I want to still be approachable. I want to seem like I care about you, but then I also have this role and this position. And in this role, I have access to information that you might not have. I have to think about everybody, and you're just thinking more primarily about yourself. And so finding that balance, I think, was something that was a struggle for me because, I think I'm saying likability, but I think there's other aspects to that in terms of wanting to seem fair, wanting to seem like I am listening and I am listening, wanting to seem like I am thoughtful and I'm taking all these different perspectives in. And sometimes it's like you lean too much on consensus and it leads to just as much chaos as if you lean too much on authoritarianism.
Yeah.
And so being able to find that balance of how much do I lean towards consensus, and then how much is it like, no, this is what's happening, this is the direction, I'm in charge here, we're moving in that path. And so I think it took some time to figure out that balance of, you know, wanting to be seen as, no, I'm still part of you, I'm, you know, that servant leadership, but then, you know, where's that balance between being a servant and being the leader? So I think that was something that was always been a difficult balance.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my own leadership experience, personally, and working with so many thousands of leaders, one of my observations about that, Nathan, is that it isn't about should I be inclusive or not inclusive, or collaborative or not collaborative. It's about discerning two things. One, it's about discerning when and where should I be inclusive. So there are times in which, if we're talking about this year's company holiday party, I might want to include everybody in that decision. If we're talking about the strategic direction of the company, that's a leadership function. The second thing I would say about that, just from my experience in discerning that balance, is that it's also about just letting the team members know in this particular decision, how are we going about making this decision? And we often don't tell them, and that's what leads to the frustration, the confusion. So when it comes, one of the things that I teach all the time when it comes to culture, from my point of view, this is a leadership function. It's a leader's responsibility to drive the culture. And the language I use for this is I say that we should include the senior leadership team in that discussion, but the language I use for this is we should include the senior leadership team for their contribution to the CEO's thinking. So in other words, if I say to you, I'm the CEO and you're in my leadership team, and I say, hey, you know, I'm going to include you because you're really valuable and I really value your input. It's important to me and it's going to influence my thinking. And at the end of the day, I'm going to, after hearing all of that, I'm going to make the decision about what we're doing. Everybody's fine with that, and they appreciate the chance to be included. But we often don't tell them. And then they walk away frustrated that, how come you didn't do what I said?
It's an interesting point around the communication, which is something that I know I've struggled with, and I've seen it also, is not being fully transparent about what your thoughts are or what you're thinking. And sometimes there is that, because I'm unsure about what I am thinking, I don't want to share it prematurely, or how much do I share?
It's a valid point.
You know, you get stuck in this, how much should I, and even being transparent around fears and concerns and, you know, the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns and all of those types of things, which I think a lot of, especially, I guess I'll say insecure. If you're not secure in your leadership, you're not secure in who you are and your role within the organization and the people, being vulnerable can feel very threatening.
Yes.
Right. And leadership is a very vulnerable position. But a lot of times people have the false idea that, no, to be a strong leader means that I'm not showing that vulnerability and I'm not putting that out there. And so vulnerability is a practice, particularly in the workplace, where it's a lot of times you've navigated, how do I keep my guard up? How do I keep my wall up to protect myself in these types of environments? Which was my experience, right? I told you, like, going through school, stay back, right? Don't show myself. And that transferred when I got into the workplace, where I don't want to talk to my manager. I don't want people to see the work. I don't want to be under that thing. But then I started feeling the opposite end, where all my work wasn't being seen. Everyone else is getting props and being recognized, and I'm not. And so that process of being able to step into the light, to be like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm thinking, and being able to stand behind that was a painful experience for me as an employee. And then once I get put into management, it becomes even trickier to be able to put your vulnerability out there and to be open, because I spent my whole life being guarded. I spent my whole life protecting myself. And now it's like, you want me to I have to put myself out there. And so that was definitely a huge challenge, just that vulnerability to be able to communicate those things. Because it definitely felt threatening. It felt icky. It felt like I can't, I guess that insecurity that I can't bring my full self into this space. How is that going to work? And so that's been a long journey to be able to get to that point.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's shift that. So you come into this company and it's diving, it's crashing, and you come in and you've got to figure out, all right, how am I going to turn this thing around, get the culture working right, get the product market fix right, et cetera. So how did this evolve into Culture Check? Tell that story.
All right. So after years of being there, COVID happens, and then we have the murder of George Floyd, and this starts creating all of this commotion, and already being one of few Black executives kind of in the city or like in the business community, there was always, I tried to reach back and be present and, to be a voice or a face that people could be like, oh yeah, Nathan did it. So, and trying to create space and a path for those coming up behind me. So that was always something I was very active in. Talking about my experiences, kind of what I just shared about that, the vulnerability, opening up, and like the challenge of not feeling like you fully belong, and how that impacts you and how it impacts your work and perspective and everything. And so once we get to this in this 2020 era, people start reaching out to me and asking me questions and wanting to know this and that. And again, my sociology background, business background, so all of it, my ability to articulate certain things or my analysis of it, people found refreshing or like an interesting take on a lot of what was going on. And so I had this vision. It came to me in a dream. And I'll share you the details, but I wanted to create like a platform. It was going to be like a SaaS platform for, I guess, DEI, so to speak. And so what I ended up happening is I created like a little pitch deck and I just started trying to pitch everybody. Maybe to be a client, you want to invest, you want, something. I was just sharing this idea to seeing what resonated with people. And I was just getting passed around. People would be like, oh, I love this idea. Have you spoke to, let me introduce you. And so there was a time period where I was doing like 4 or 5 calls a day, speaking to bank executives, tech executives, people in the government, all areas and industries. And people were like, this is really interesting. Let me introduce you here. And what started happening was people are like, I'm not really interested in the platform, but I'm interested in you. Would you come and do a workshop for my team, for my executives? And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in that. And then it happened again. Like, can you come and speak here or do this? And so eventually I'm like, because I didn't want to be the voice. I didn't want to be a face. I'm like, I have
You're the background
experiences.
guy.
Yes, let me be in the background. Again, the same story over and over again. I'm not trying to be up front. Let me be the background. But the more I did it, everyone's like, no. You need to be the voice. You need to be up front. You have that thing that people want to hear. And so I said yes to these workshops. And then for the first 2 years, it was just word of mouth. Like people were passing me around, come and speak at this event, speak to my this offsite, and it just grew organically in that way. And so that's really how it all started, was just accepting that call of being a voice, of speaking up. And the more I did these workshops, I did presentations, it was really resonating with people. I would walk into a lot of situations, arms crossed. People are like, I don't believe any of this stuff. And in the end, like a number of people told me like, I was against all of this, but you've really changed my mind. Right. And seeing that it wasn't about the concepts, right, of equity, inclusion, like they've become bad words, quote unquote, and divisive words. But at the heart of it, people don't have a problem with the concepts. It's just been the packaging that people have been resisting and how they've been executed. But being able to present it in a different type of way seemed to have resonated a lot and differentiated the work that we were doing from other people in the field.
Got it. So let's get, for our audience's sake and for my sake, let's get clearer on. So somebody hires you to do a workshop. What is it that you are teaching them?
So that's a big question because it evolved quite a bit over the years. Originally, they were calling and being like, "Hey, we want anti-racism training," or we want, that's kind of where it started off. Okay. And then it was, well, can you help with our policies? Can you help with this? Can you do a consulting project to understand our hiring practices? Can you? And so it always evolved and changed with each client what they were looking for and what the expectations were. And so for many years, we were just kind of being that support where it's like, okay, we have understanding, we have these different skill sets. Let's just be the support that people are looking to strengthen their culture. They are struggling. They, burnout, division, all of these things. And so the scope really grew quite a bit. And so, the anti-racism workshops were the foot in the door on culture. Right. But as you said, like with, the video marketing, culture was really studying sociology. Culture has always been the thing. Right. And so it was really using those initial anti-racism trainings to engage in more conversations, because you can't isolate an issue when it comes to culture. Right. Because everything is interconnected. Right. And so that was the entry point. But as we did our work, it was always holistic in nature in terms of how do we create an environment where people feel valued? Where people feel heard, where we're able to move more effectively together and not be working against each other. And so it was always that we came in, and then it was always a more holistic approach. Right. And so at the end of the day, it was how do we create cultures that function better together? How do we create cultures that yield the results that we wanted them to? And so we went about it through, our typical offerings that we had were around workshops, coaching, policy, and then assessments to kind of see where the culture is at, to provide recommendations, pathways, and then being able to support people to implement those recommendations from there.
So I'm assuming from what you've described that there are probably many misperceptions or misconceptions about, we'll call it DEI, for lack of a better phrase. And a lot of people have this, and probably myself included, have this maybe fixed in our brain in a way that either isn't accurate or maybe perhaps isn't useful. And as you've gone into these companies, you've been able, I'm guessing about this, but I'm going to ask you, I'm assuming that you've been able to help people maybe reframe how they think about this into a more useful way. So can you describe, what are some of those misperceptions about DEI, and how do you help people to see this in a way that's actually more useful and more productive? And that's where we'll pause part one of my conversation with Nathan Hall, founder and CEO of CultureCheck. When we come back in part two, you're going to hear his thoughtful answer to the big question about DEI, along with insights on reframing difference, lowering the temperature in the room, and helping organizations move forward together. So stay tuned.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.